Hypercalcemia is one form of endocrine emergency which is relatively rare, but it is often associated with long-term complications and often missed because of the lack of overall awareness in that regard. So what we'll do is that we'll be focusing about the different aspects of hypercalcemia, and that would basically include cases related to hyperparathyroidism, which were confused with vitamin D deficiency, and vice versa, pituitary parathyroid adenoma, possibility of carcinoma, then non-PTH dependent causes. So all we'll discuss in that perspective, and we'll be joined by our colleagues in that regards. Now, all of you can go and have a look at our Mediclasses Pediatric Endocrinology website, learning.growsociety.in, which has got a lot of information about these aspects, as well as various courses which are available there. And we have recently launched our book, Advances in Pediatric Endocrinology, which is available through the website in that regards. Now, when we talk about calcium homeostasis, we need to understand that the calcium levels are controlled by three major organs and three major hormones. So we have got three major organs, which are the intestine, from which you get the calcium inside, the bones, which are the acute changes which will happen, and kidneys, which are the long-term regulator in terms of calcium levels. So if you want to change the calcium levels acutely, you will rely on the bone. Long-term modifications are intestine and kidneys from that perspective. Now, there are three major hormones. PTH, which is the primary hormone because it regulates most of the other pathways. Vitamin D, which is dependent on PTH, but again a major player. And calcitonin, which is a minor player. Now, within this perspective, which causes will be associated with hypercalcemia, Manoj?
So PTH.
PTH what? High PTH, low PTH?
High PTH.
And
excessive vitamin D.
What about calcitonin?
Minor role in regulation.
So what we need to understand is that there are two, as in any form of evolutionary process, the body wants the calcium level to be high. It wants to avoid hypocalcemia. So there are two major hypercalcemic hormones, PTH and calcitriol. Calcitonin is only a ceiling hormone. It's there for only some time. So calcitonin deficiency. What will happen with calcitonin deficiency? Theoretically, you should have what will happen to calcium if you have too little calcitonin? It should go up theoretically, but that's not the case clinically in that regard. So basically, hyperparathyroidism and calcitriol excess are the major causes with regards to hypercalcemia, and calcitonin deficiency is not associated in that perspective. So these are the main thing to understand in that regards. The other important thing to remember is the phosphorus level. Now, we have discussed that PTH and calcitriol will both raise calcium. What would they do to phosphorus, Naveen?
So PTH will cause a decrease in phosphorus. Whenever
okay, so PTH decreases phosphorus, calcitriol
increases phosphorus.
So one single test which will really tell you which way you are heading. So the broad categories are PTH dependent and vitamin D dependent. So look at phosphorus. If your phosphorus is low, it is suggestive of a PTH excess. If the phosphorus is normal or high, it is vitamin D. So as in hypocalcemia, when we say if the phosphorus is high, it is PTH problem. If the phosphorus is low normal, it is a vitamin D problem. It's just the opposite. So hypercalcemia with a normal phosphorus, vitamin D, low phosphorus is PTH, because it is not possible. What will be the first thing to happen with PTH? Phosphorus will come down. Calcium rise will be later. So it's impossible for a hyperparathyroidism to not have hypophosphatemia when you have hypercalcemia. There may be some exceptions, but phosphorus is the most important in that perspective. So now when we look into this, the body senses the calcium based upon the calcium levels using the calcium sensing receptor, and based upon that it starts acting in that regards and acts in terms of whether the calcium is low or high. Now what does calcium sensing receptor does? So which all organs should respond to calcium? Cyan. And therefore they should have the calcium sensing receptor.
So one is the parathyroid.
Second
Second is the kidney.
And third?
And third is the bone.
And?
So calcitonin also senses.
So we need to think of all the possible areas in which calcium sensing will have a role. So we have a specific G protein sensing receptor for calcium. Do we have anything else? Do we have a sodium sensing receptor? Do we have a potassium sensing receptor? Do we have a magnesium sensing receptor? Magnesium sensing happens through calcium. So it's an orphan, this thing. So calcium is such an important metabolite or an ion that there is a specific receptor for it. And that gives you the importance of calcium in that perspective. No other ion has got a specific receptor which senses it. Glucose is sensed, that too through GCK and other pathway, but this is a direct sensing mechanism. So the calcium sensing receptor is a classical G protein coupled receptor, which is located most importantly in the parathyroid. So if your calcium is high, PTH will of course come down. That is direct effect. It is also there in the kidneys. So it will say, okay, push more calcium out. There will be hypercalciuria, which will happen in that perspective. It's there also in the thyroid gland to have an effect on calcitonin. So it will also influence calcitonin. Also, this is a mild player. So when your calcium goes up, body says, okay, calcitonin come up and bring the calcium down. And subsequently, they will also be in the bone where it will say, now we have got enough calcium and let's form bone. So now in that context, if we talk about calcium sensing receptor, if you have a condition in which the calcium sensing receptor is not working, what will happen, Dr. Pratik, in that setting?
So if the calcium is not working, you will have, the body will sense less calcium. So it will have high PTH and it will also have loss of calcium in the kidney.
So inactivating mutations would cause hypercalcemia with hypocalciuria. So this is a classical parameter. So now when I'll talk about evaluation, there are two most important investigations. One is phosphorus. If it is low, it is a PTH cause. And second is the urinary calcium. Everybody who has hyperparathyroidism and hypercalcemia should have hypercalciuria. But if you have a hypocalciuria, it is a calcium sensing receptor. So urinary calcium is absolutely important. Now, what does PTH do to kidney? So PTH major effect is at the level of 1-alpha hydroxylase production, causing calcitriol production. So most of your PTH effect comes through calcitriol, and that's why in hypoparathyroidism, if you just give calcitriol and calcium, your work is done. The second major effect, of course, is at the level of distal tubule, where it causes calcium absorption. Now, this is interesting. What it means is that in hyperparathyroidism, your urinary calcium should be high or low.
Urinary calcium should be the high.
Why? Because you are absorbing, yet it is high. See, what you are seeing is that PTH is actually conserving calcium, but the calcium is high in the urine because your blood calcium is high. If you have, let's say, 3 group of individuals, one with hypoparathyroidism, second with hyperparathyroidism, and third with a normal parathyroid, and everybody's calcium is 12, who will have the maximum urinary calcium?
Normal.
Those who have hypoparathyroidism, because they don't have a conserving effect. So that's why in hypoparathyroidism, you maintain calcium around 8.5, 9 maximum, not more than that. Hyperparathyroidism will have the lowest urinary calcium. But yet, if your calcium is 14, you will lose in the urine. So even though we say that there is hypercalciuria in hyperparathyroidism, it is actually a relative hypocalciuria. For the same level of calcium, they are losing less calcium as compared to a normal individual. So a normal individual calcium of 14 will have much more hypercalciuria and as compared to hyperparathyroidism. So what does it mean? That if you have a child who has a vitamin D dependent situation, which is basically causing hypercalcemia, versus a PTH dependent, which one will have more likelihood of nephrocalcinosis? What will happen to the PTH there?
It will be very low.
PTH will be low, so your renal conservation will be less. So you will be losing, for the same level of calcium, you will lose much more urinary calcium than somebody who has a PTH dependent cause. And that's why if you see somebody who has just been treated with vitamin D for a month, vitamin D toxicity, they develop nephrocalcinosis. While hyperparathyroidism takes a long time for nephrocalcinosis to happen. So a very important message out here is that PTH actually conserves calcium. And if you have hyperparathyroidism, you have relative hypocalciuria, but because of hypercalcemia, it is overridden. So you will still have but your risk of nephrocalcinosis will be slightly lower compared to vitamin D dependent causes, and that's what we'll see in our cases also, in a couple of cases in that perspective. Now, what happens also, and this of course, if your calcium is too high, you will have nephrocalcinosis, which is a clinical presentation in that regards. The other thing which will happen is that it also acts on the phosphorus channels and causes phosphorus loss. So if you have hyperparathyroidism, there will clearly be hypophosphatemia, which is a classical feature which will happen, and this we have discussed. If your phosphorus is high or normal, think that this is most likely not a PTH related cause. I think that's a key message out there. Now, if you have got long-standing hyperparathyroidism and you develop nephrocalcinosis, what can happen to the acidification status of the kidneys?
So long term, if you have hyperparathyroidism which is uncorrected, Fanconi syndrome can develop. You can lose bicarbonate.
So you will have acidosis. So hyperparathyroidism causes metabolic acidosis along with a Fanconi-like picture. So you may have amino acid urea, you may have bicarbonate urea, which may be persistent. What will happen to magnesium level in hyperparathyroidism?
In hyperparathyroidism,
Primary hyperparathyroidism.
so magnesium will be lost.
And what will happen in the calcium sensing receptor defect?
So calcium sensing receptor, calcium will also come, magnesium will also come in hypermagnesium.
So one important, so now we are talking about evaluation. We talked about phosphorus, PTH dependent, independent. We talked about urinary calcium, high in hyperparathyroidism, low in calcium sensing receptor defect. Third is magnesium. If your magnesium level is low, it means hyperparathyroidism. If the magnesium is high, it means calcium sensing receptor defect, which causes. So if you understand physiology, very, very easily you can understand how all these things are linked in that perspective. So the effect of hyperparathyroidism is not only hypercalcemia, it is hypercalciuria, nephrocalcinosis, Fanconi syndrome, as well as hypophosphatemia. So all this can happen in that regards. Now, why is it important? Sometimes you will get a case who has nephrocalcinosis, who has acidosis, and who has secondary hyperparathyroidism. Somebody would say, what is primary? Now, is it the PTH which caused this nephrocalcinosis, or is the RTA which causes hypercalciuria? So this is very, very important, and we'll talk about how these confusions are to be looked into. And this is very important because when you talk about primary hyperparathyroidism, you have to exclude RTA as a cause of secondary, because that will give you exactly the same picture. Hypercalciuria, nephrocalcinosis. So is the PTH first, or is it mainly the renal tubular acidosis which is causing the problem, distal RTA which is causing the problem in that regards? Now, what does PTH do to bone, Dr. Pratik?
So it depends on the blood calcium level. It activates both on osteoblast and osteoclast. It is more in favor of bone resorption.
So where is the major effect of PTH? Is it osteoblast or osteoclast?
Osteoclast.
The major effect of PTH is directly on the osteoblast, and from the osteoblast it regulates the OPG and the rank ligand pathway to control. So there is no direct PTH receptor on the osteoclast, but yes, if you have hyperparathyroidism, your bone turnover increases. So which means you will have bone formation and bone resorption. And whenever bone turnover increases, what happens to the calcium level? It increases. Why?
Because actually bone is lost. Turnover is so fast that new bone is not able to form.
Yes. So when we talk about delinking process, as you will talk about in the setting of immobilization, or when we talk about increased bone formation, resorption is quicker. If you talk about bone cycling, resorption is quicker, formation is slower. So you will get a lot of calcium out from the bone, you won't put it there. So that's why you will have hypercalcemia, which is coming from there. So hyperparathyroidism, hypercalcemia is coming from two places. One, calcitriol is high, so you are absorbing more calcium. And second, the bone turnover is high. What will be the biochemical sign of increased bone turnover, which you can easily look at, or increased bone formation, which is the best marker? So ALP levels will be high, and we'll discuss about, I think in your case, ALP levels were high in the setting, which will tell you that, okay, ALP is so high, it is most likely a PTH related cause in that regards. So PTH has got a direct effect on bone by increasing the osteoblast is the major factor, And from there, it has an indirect effect on the osteoclast, causing increased calcium elution from the bones. Bones will become weak. There will be a risk of fractures, and we can see that pathological fractures, rickets, all those things can happen with hyperparathyroidism in that regards. And you, of course, have a classical hyperparathyroid bone disease which happens. What about vitamin D? So the major effect of vitamin D in terms of bone metabolism is maintaining serum calcium. If you have no vitamin D, if you have no vitamin D receptor, just maintain, give IV calcium, your calcium level is okay, you will not develop any metabolic bone disease. So the major effect is calcium, and this calcium usually is through absorption. In the absence of vitamin D, what proportion of calcium is absorbed by the body? And with sufficiency of vitamin D, 40. So you have effectively 60% rise in the amount of calcium that you take. What about phosphorus? How many percentage? It go up to 80%. So in a way, it is increasing both calcium and phosphorus. So of course, this is one situation you will have normal or high phosphorus in the setting, which will happen. Now, there is also an effect on the level of the bone. So if there is sufficiency of vitamin D, it will go into the bone. If it's deficiency, it will resolve. And it will also inhibit the PTH. So if your calcitriol is high, PTH will be inhibited. When PTH is inhibited, of course, what will happen is that you start losing urinary calcium. So somebody who has vitamin D related hypercalcemia of 12 or 13 will have a much more urinary calcium than somebody who has a hyperparathyroid related. So when we talk about, let's say, hyperinsulinism, we say that for the same level of glucose of 30, somebody who has a GSD will be doing much better because ketones are there, while somebody with hyperinsulinism will do worse. Same, for the same level of calcium, a child who with vitamin D excess will be much worse in terms of renal outcome. And we look into your case of sarcoidosis, they developed such renal failure at a not very high level of calcium. So this is important because your PTH conserving effect is not there in that setting. So this is something which is important to remember. So calcitriol in a way increases both calcium and phosphorus. So if you have hypercalcemia with hyperphosphatemia, think about a vitamin D related cause in that setting. Or of course, if your bone is not getting formed, then all your calcium and phosphorus is in the blood, typically of immobilization or so three causes of hypercalcemia and hypophosphatemia. Hypercalcemia, hyperphosphatemia, both high.
So one is immobilization.
Second
is any local lesion which is causing osteolysis.
Okay. So your bone, you're getting more calcium out of the bone, more phosphorus out of the bone. That is second. And third, your bone is not getting formed classically in the newborn period because of hypophosphatase. You don't have any alkaline phosphatase. So how will your mineralization happen? So these are the three causes of high phosphorus with hypercalcemia: immobilization, hypophosphatemia, malignancy. These will be the three that you have to think of. And of course, vitamin D excess, if it is huge, it can also have a high normal level of phosphorus, but not always. So this is something you have to be wary about. And it also has an effect on the urinary calcium excretion as well. So this is all about the control. Now, what we need to understand that vitamin D needs to be activated via 1-alpha hydroxylase into calcitriol, which is the active form. Now, the most common regulated site is in the proximal tubule of the intestine. What are the other areas in which 1-alpha hydroxylase is expressed other than kidneys?
Macrophages.
Yes.
Some local reason.
So macrophages, second.
Like inflammation.
Think about where vitamin D works. Which part of the body vitamin D works? Of course, in the macrophages, immune modulation. It will, of course, work in that perspective. So in the kidneys, it is PTH and PTHRP which is regulating. But other places which you need to be aware about is adipocyte. Adipocyte has got a lot of 1-alpha hydroxylase. You, of course, have macrophage because it causes immune modulation. Heart, there is a direct effect. And there is skin. Why I'm talking about skin? What happens in vitamin D dependent rickets type 2? What cutaneous manifestation is there?
Alopecia.
Yes. So for hair growth, you need vitamin D. So this 1-alpha hydroxylase is also there in the skin. Heart is very important. That is why vitamin D deficiency causes cardiomyopathy. So this really includes into that. So this understanding of the regulation becomes important. From a hypercalcemia perspective, this macrophage is very important, because if you have macrophage activation, independent of your calcium, independent of your PTH, you will have this 1-alpha hydroxylase action, and that will cause severe hypercalcemia. So this will cause a problem. Now, of course, if the calcium level is high, you will have multiple effects on the body. The most common effect, of course, is because calcium is coming from the bone, bone will become weak. There will be encephalopathy when the calcium levels are very high. There would be ECG changes in cardiac effect, which will be there. Most importantly, you can also have pancreatitis when you have severe hypercalcemia, along with polyuria, and you will have constipation. So typical presentation of hypercalcemia is abdominal pain, constipation, polyuria, dehydration, failure to thrive, severe cases cardiac problem, encephalopathy, and pancreatitis. And this will of course depend upon the age of presentation. So neonates will typically present with dehydration. So any sick child, do a calcium. Dehydration, polyuria, hypotonia, and this will be the severe form, will be encephalopathy. This is usually neonatal severe hyperparathyroidism. Calcium will be 18, 16, 18, something like that. Not easy to miss in that setting. Childhood, they will present with typical moan, groan, abdominal pain. So abdominal pain, hypertension, again hypercalcemia has to be excluded. Renal calcification, always you have to do a calcium level in that regards, and of course bone disease. Now, as discussed for sodium, for other parameters, the level depend upon the absolute, the manifestations depend upon the absolute level as well as the rate of rise. But what we need to understand is that till 12, typically 3 millimoles per liter, you will not have any symptoms of hypercalcemia. Irritability will start from around 12 to 14. Polyuria beyond 12. So why does it cause polyuria? Why does hypercalcemia cause polyuria?
Because of the effect of ADH.
There is an osmotic effect, so there is an osmotic diuresis, plus it interferes the AVP effect also, so it causes nephrogenic diabetes insipidus in that setting. Hypertension, why does it cause hypertension? Direct blood vessel effect, calcium, that's why we use calcium channel blockers. So of course, that's why the calcium is working through that perspective. Dehydration beyond 14, encephalopathy typically 15, 16. So if you know the symptoms, you will know the rough calcium levels in that perspective, and then you will develop seizures. So now in that perspective, we can now understand that why would somebody develop hypercalcemia. The problems could be if you are having a bone turnover. If the bone turnover is increased, or you are just having resorption and not formation, you will have hypercalcemia. Or if your intestine is having more absorption, very rarely if your kidneys are not excreting. This is a secondary. It will help, but it is not the primary cause usually. And if your sensing is defective. So bone turnover may be increased in hyperparathyroidism. In the setting of malignancies, as Sayan mentioned about, will be the cause. And if your PTH receptor is hyperactive, that is Janssen's metaphyseal dysautosis. So effectively, increased PTH effect or bone resorption, that will be the situation that is there. So if you have a lytic lesion like ALL, now if you talk about young children, ALL is known to cause hypercalcemia. Older individuals, myeloma. So this will be the cause which can cause this. Thyrotoxicosis can also cause hypercalcemia. Vitamin A and retinoic acid, these are a few drugs which will cause hypercalcemia, but rare in practice. If there is no bone formation, like hypophosphatemia, phosphatasia, or immobilization, you will again have hypercalcemia because all your calcium and phosphorus will go out. But here your phosphorus will be high. So hypercalcemia, hyperphosphatemia, you will think about immobilization, hypophosphatasia, and a lytic lesion which can cause that in that perspective. Now, increased vitamin D intake will be a cause. So this is common, and I would say this is one of the most common cause from a pediatric perspective. So if somebody is giving a lot of vitamin D, it will cause hypercalcemia. Typically, you will have high phosphorus and urinary calcium will be high. Early tendency of developing nephrocalcinosis will be there in that setting. Granulomatous disease because of subcutaneous fat necrosis, because of sarcoidosis, tuberculosis can also cause increased 1-alpha hydroxylase action in that regards. There is one very interesting condition in which there is a 24 hydroxylase deficiency. So what happens here is that the vitamin D cannot be inactivated. So even if you give a small dose of vitamin D, there will be hypercalcemia, which is known, and this is partially explaining the idiopathic hypercalcemia of infancy, quote unquote, the term which was used earlier. Thiazide diuretics, now they are not the cause, but they are contributory. And I think you will also look into one of the cases in which thiazides may cause more hypercalcemia. And this is something you have to always think about in terms of history. And of course, if there is a calcium sensing receptor defect, you will find a situation wherein you will have hypercalcemia with hypocalciuria. So these are the basic situations which you need to understand in the setting and evaluate accordingly. Now, when you have a patient with hypercalcemia, the next step is how do you evaluate? So I would say there are three major investigations which will really give you a diagnosis, and we'll focus on these predominantly. I would say the most important, of course, is the phosphorus. Everybody who has hypercalcemia should have a high phosphorus. I'm talking in the same way when I say hypocalcemia should have a low phosphorus. Similarly, hypercalcemia should have a high phosphorus except if there is a PTH problem. So if you have a calcium sensing receptor defect, hyperparathyroidism, or Jansen's disease, these are the increased PTH effect, phosphorus will be low, everywhere else it will be high. So phosphorus becomes important in that regards. The second, of course, is PTH. Everybody who has hyperparathyroidism should have a high PTH, while others will have a low PTH. Now, what is important to understand is that what do you mean by a high PTH in hypercalcemia, Dr. Pratik?
Any PTH more than level of 20 at the time of hypercalcemia is hyperparathyroidism.
So we need to understand that the PTH should theoretically be low. It should be 0 in the setting of hypercalcemia. But if your PTH is more than 20, you should start thinking that this is hyperparathyroidism. This is an important concept to understand. So phosphorus, PTH, and the third, of course, is urinary calcium. Everybody with hypercalcemia should have hypercalciuria, because if you have more in blood, more in urine, the only condition would be a calcium sensing receptor defect, and second, Naveen, thiazide diuretics, because they will cause falsely hypercalciuria, and that's why we'll talk about how urinary calcium become important to evaluate in that regards. So if you just look at phosphorus, PTH, and urinary calcium, your diagnosis is done. Vitamin D, of course, if you have a history, you can think of vitamin D, and calcitriol, if you're talking about the setting in which you have a vitamin D dependent cause, you have got a high phosphorus, but your 25 OHD is not high. Then you do calcitriol in that setting, and PTH is 0. So mainly these first three, phosphorus, PTH, and urinary calcium, will give you the diagnosis in most cases. That's what is most important. So now, as we discussed, there is a log linear relationship between calcium and PTH. As the calcium goes up, PTH goes down. So anybody who has got hypercalcemia with a PTH more than 20 is hyperparathyroidism. Less than 20 is PTH independent. But this is not absolute. You have to look at other picture as well. But this concept is important. So as for hyperinsulinism, any detectable insulin during hypoglycemia is significant. Any detectable PTH or PTH more than 20 is significant in hypercalcemia. Don't say, okay, PTH is 40, it cannot be hyperparathyroidism. No, that's not true. More than 20 is significant, and this is an important concept which has to be looked into in that regards. So now, before we go into cases, just to summarize, look at the PTH level. If the PTH level is below 20, we are talking about a PTH independent cause in that setting, then most likely vitamin D. So look at vitamin D. If it is high, it is vitamin D toxicity. If the vitamin D is normal, look at calcitriol. If the calcitriol is high, it means that there is something going wrong which is causing more production. Is it fatty necrosis? Is it sarcoidosis? We'll discuss about that. If that is also normal, then you're talking about some immobilization, hypophosphatasia, all those lytic lesions, they will become important, and then clinical picture will guide you. If your PTH is above 20, then you're dealing with hyperparathyroidism or a calcium sensing receptor defect. Now, hyperparathyroidism, the PTH will be very high, but sometimes it is difficult. So then you look at a fractional excretion of calcium. If the fractional excretion of calcium is more than 2%, this is clearly hyperparathyroidism. If it is 1 to 2%, it may be falsely low because of cyan.
Vitamin D deficiency and one more thing, thiazide.
So you look at vitamin D level. If vitamin D is normal, then you think of hyperparathyroidism. If vitamin D is low, you give a trial of calcium and vitamin D and see whether it increases. If it is increasing, you go more in favor of a hyperparathyroidism. If it is less than 1%, it is usually a calcium sensing receptor defect. But again, if vitamin D is normal, then that is confirmed. If vitamin D is low, it can still be a masked hyperparathyroidism. So what I'm trying to say is that the most important investigation is PTH. PTH low, vitamin D related, do 25 OHD and calcitriol. PTH high, look at urinary calcium. And based upon that and fractional excretion of calcium will decide whether it is a calcium sensing receptor defect versus a primary hyperparathyroidism. Management is absolutely different. For primary hyperparathyroidism, you have to do surgery. For hypocalciuria or in the form of a benign hypercalcemia, you don't need to do surgery. It is not going to cure in that perspective. Remember that vitamin D deficiency can play spoil sport and that can cause confusion in that setting. 5-year-old female, recurrent renal stone, high PTH of 110, calcium of 10.4, low 2.3, sesame B scan normal. So I think this is clearly a case of a primary hyperparathyroidism. The PTH is high and the phosphorus is on the lower side. So I would say look at the urinary calcium level, which will be high. Probably it will require exploration in that setting because often it may be missed in that regard. So this, Dr. Mudita, will require exploration. Now, vitamin deficiency would probably have an impact, but if your calcium is also high and you have calcium correction, I would say repeat it after vitamin D course, but mostly exploration will be required in that setting. The second questions which are there in terms of when is steroid stopped in vitamin D toxicity? So usually it may take up to 2 to 3 months. So we say 6 to 12 weeks, depending upon the calcium levels, then we can consider stopping the treatment in that setting in that regards. Now, looking into some other questions which are there. How does hyperparathyroid cause rickets and ractic changes? So it is a bony deformity resembling rickets. If the level is very persistently high, it's more of resorption. A lot of rickets changes are actually because of secondary hyperparathyroidism. So it is not classical metaphysical changes, but it is changes which are related to hyperparathyroidism which are present. What is the PTH effect on growth plate? This is asking from Dr. Pankaj. So the major effect is actually on the osteoblast. On the chondrocyte also, there is an important role, but the major regulator there is actually PTH related peptide. It is the PTH RP and not PTH. And that's why if you have hypoparathyroidism, nothing happens in terms of growth plate. But if you have a PTH receptor problem, you will have severe chondrodysplasia. So the major regulator is at very early growth. It is PTH related peptide and not PTH. Dr. Pankaj is asking how thiazide cause hypercalcemia. There is a direct impact. We'll discuss about that in much more detail in our module. There is a direct effect on terms of urinary calcium loss, which is there. Dr. Pinky is asking role of PTH RP in hypercalcemia evaluation. We skipped that part because that was becoming a bit long in terms of discussion. Only if you have ruled out a PTH related cause. So you have a calcium level which is high, phosphorus is low, and PTH is undetectable. So you have an increased PTH effect, but your PTH is undetectable. So in that setting, you do a PTH RP and look for the malignancies which can cause a high PTH, but not routinely. Dr. Mudita is asking how exactly the intraoperative sample taken for PTH. So if you have got a good lab which can immediately report you, you can take the sample during the procedure. So if after taking out the nodule, immediately there is a fall, that means that it is effective, which happened in the case that was discussed by Cyan in that regards. Dr. Mudita is again asking, sometimes lab gives more than report, any specific instruction to the lab? So more than, I don't get the point. So more than this particular level. So if we are mainly bothered about PTH, whether it is less than 20, more than 20. So if they say more than 100, more than 200, I will consider it to be very, very high. Think of secondary hyperparathyroidism or malignancy. But I am more concerned about lower sensitivity because that is more important. If you look at all our 4 cases who had PTH independent, it was less than 20, very clearly. One of them was undetectable also in the setting. Dr. Ratnivel is asking what precautions to be taken in cerebral palsy who don't move, sir. I think this is a very important point because they are at risk of hypercalcemia. Do not unnecessarily give them vitamin D and calcium. Now, we have a normal habit that we keep on giving a lot of calcium and vitamin D, but be cautious in that setting because they can cause hypercalcemia, which is there in that regards. Dr. Sanju is asking, in the case of vitamin toxicity, why low phosphorus? Yeah, so that was a bit unusual case. Maybe what has happened is that he received vitamin D and the calcium went up, but phosphorus was not very high, which was there in this case, which was a bit unusual. We expect a normal. So it was normal or low? So it was normal. So it is not low. So it is not like a PTH cause. It's not high also. So there could be other possibilities, but this is something which is there to look at. Dr. Vidu is asking, in vitamin D toxicity, IV bolus, how much should be given, and oral steroids, how long to be given? So we usually give the initial bolus is 20 to 40 ml per kg, followed by double maintenance IV fluid and diuretics. Then oral steroids 2 milligram per kg, 6 to 12 weeks. Usually, depending upon how the calcium levels will be there, we give in that regards.